Hi, it's Andrew from Party Meeple. All the COVID-related rallies around Australia last Saturday just got me thinking about a few things. One is the actual nature of personal freedom. One is the claim the virus is inevitable and cannot be beaten, so we should just get on and accept living with it killing a few of us. Another is the 0.05% mortality rate many of these protesters use to justify basically ignoring the virus and the pandemic. Sure, it's not a big number, but I'm not comfortable with popping 1 in every 2,000 people off this mortal coil just so I can do whatever suits me. I thought I'd dig into this number a little and satisfy my own curiosity about actual COVID statistics as they may apply to me. As a board gamer, many of the games I play have interlocking numerical mechanics where my actions in the current turn may set up some fun shit in turns down the track. So I find working out probabilities an interesting exercise. Besides, I'd be digging through data for myself rather than just relying on hearsay. The interwebs and media is full of all sorts of claims, and often they are backed by some extra agenda, and it's good to try and understand that before blindly accepting them. It was only last week that Sky News' Alan Jones popped a few figures on a screen and claimed you were less likely to survive the Delta strain if you were vaccinated. A claim his employer quietly pointed out was false in the following days. I feel they should have made him make that correction personally. But the first thing I'd like to discuss is whether the virus can be beaten. So I got Googling. I gathered a bunch of data and put a little spreadsheet together. I should say that I looked at figures from multiple sources: World Health Organization, the Centre for Disease Control, Johns Hopkins, and some various internet aggregators. I like to feel there's some authenticity to the numbers I used. Sometimes numbers varied, but only ever by 0.1%. This is probably expected as the pandemic will have changed day to day between the publishing dates of these figures. I should also point out that these numbers are since the start of COVID, and as vaccines are starting to roll out, things should improve dramatically. But I think it's worth finding out what the last 18 months could have been like where I lived if we treated COVID the same way as other places have. So there's a mortality rate chart here that I'm showing you, and if you look at the mortality rate chart, you can see Brazil is doing most poorly with 259 deaths per 100,000 folk. I think they've just given up the fight. But there are two nations in this top 10 that regard themselves as world leaders, the USA and the UK. I decided to include the USA as the world leader benchmark for my spreadsheet, as I think the USA's attitudes are what's spilled over into my country at the moment with these rallies. Also, the USA and the UK death rates are actually pretty similar. The thing is, various countries have treated COVID with different degrees of seriousness, and you can see the mortality rate decreasing dramatically towards the bottom of the graph. Here's a trend line that shows that if you put the effort in, you get results. Right down to my patch of the globe, where the mortality rate is less than 1. But are these numbers fair? If you were doing a study on testicle or prostate cancer, would you include all the world's women in your database? Think of how that would affect your result. It's actually very similar with the virus. Those under 18 hardly appear in mortality rates, so including them will skew your figures. Similarly, including women in a prostate cancer study. We know that age has a lot to do with how easily you'll survive a virus attack, so I thought I'd look into that. After all, we should base our judgment of this on those who are most vulnerable, not someone who'll most likely shrug it off with a fever and some minor aches. Here's a table that shows the death versus age. The description text explains that if the reference group represents the death of one person, then other amounts can be expected in the other age columns. So for every 18 to 29-year-old that is killed by COVID, the virus kills 600 aged 85 or over. Once again, this feels like an outlying stat to me, so for my use, I picked 65 years of age. This suited me as I was able to find a population cutoff at 65 in the US Census data and have a bunch of friends and relations in the 65 and older age bracket. If you remove the 32,000 odd deaths of people under the age of 65 in the US, you get 571,000 dead US folk. Now I can calculate a new mortality rate based on the US population of over 65s. This is just over 65 million. Oh, 56. This is just over 56 million. You get just over 1%. So COVID affects part of my friends group at a rate of 1 in 100. Very, very different from the 1 in 2,000 these so-called freedom rally people talk about. I think I know about 25 to 30 people that may be in this age bracket. I don't know the age of all my friends and distant family, but this is pretty close. So the 1 in 100 ratio means I'd have a worse than 25% chance of losing one of these people if we paid COVID the same respect the USA did, and I'm honestly not happy about that. I'd like to ask you, how would you fare now we've distilled the percentage down to something meaningful for us? Which of your older friends would you be happy to quite possibly kill because you'd like the freedom to do whatever the fuck you want? In Western Australia, we have a quite significant Italian community whose family groups extend far beyond mine. Are you one of them, and how would you fare? If you knew 50 people 65 years or older, aunts and uncles, grandparents and so on, you're basically flipping a coin to kill somebody. As I said in the beginning, all of this had me thinking about the actual meaning of the word freedom. In politics and pretty much every media use, the word freedom is presented with positive connotations. When people say freedom, the natural reaction is always something good. So does this mean if what you're doing is freedom, it's not going to be actually bad for anyone else in the community? If what you're doing is bad, like causing me a 25% chance of losing a friend, which I think is very, very bad, I think what you're doing is anarchy. I think what we saw around Australia last weekend was anarchists who don't give a shit about what happens to the real victims of COVID. And all this gum banging about tyranny and government control, if that was really a thing here in Australia that we should fear, there'd have been lines of armed soldiers and police, along with hundreds of buses with blacked out windows, waiting to round up these selfish dicks and disappear them to a desert detention centre. We got them. We know this, as there are places on earth where marching around accusing the government of random stuff will get you exactly this response. Part of freedom, as I see it, is a responsibility to those around you. If you're a lone soul on a distant moon, freedom would actually be a meaningless word, as it needs to be in relation to other people. As a lone soul, you can do what you want anyway. You don't need to describe freedom. At least that's the type of freedom these freedom rally types are promoting. They may see a white boss whipping his workers in an 1850s Tennessee cotton plantation as exercising his freedom. But I don't. Hopefully these bastards have not caused a super spreader event. It's unlikely in my state, as community transmission is almost unheard of here. But I fear for the people of Sydney and Melbourne. It's worth noting that our so-called lockdowns are just requests to stay at home unless you need to go out for supplies or essential work. And if everyone sticks to the plan, they are short and very few. How people feel they are a civil rights infringement baffles me. And seriously, popping a mask on in public is hardly difficult. I'm sure it helps a little, but most importantly, it shows those around you that you give a shit and you're in this fight. In fact, if I'm not feeling well, I think I like the idea of just wearing a mask in public anyway. Spread kind thoughts, not sick breath bugs. If you made it to the end, thanks for sticking with all the numbers. Why not leave a comment below telling us how many friends and family you have in the plus 65 age group? I suspect we're all far more affected than we realise. The Party Meeple channel is normally about board games, and I've used game-style probability to work out how people allowing the virus to spread would affect me. If you're interested in board games, why not subscribe and like? I'll see you in a month or so with the next Party Meeple video, which I promise will be more board game related.